Okay, so this class is intended to be whether you want to be an investor, whether you have a client that is an investor, or if you just want to get another tool in your toolbox. Private lending is an amazing opportunity to be able to purchase homes without the conventional loans. And so I think this is a really powerful topic, and when we did our survey, when we started Investor Club, this was actually the most voted on topic that people wanted to hear about, was about private lending. So without further ado, we're gonna go through our panelists. And the first question that I want each of them to answer is to give us an introduction and how they got started in private lending, and then go into what are the primary types of loans that your company specializes in. So Kevin, we'll start with you.
Hey guys, my name is Kevin Brown. I am a full-time investor and lender. I mostly focus on just single-family investment properties, whether those are rentals or flips. Lately, it's been a lot more flips, but people that, whether they're gonna buy it, fix it up, with my loan, and then refi out of me, and keep it, or just a flip deal. But yeah, I don't really touch commercial. I don't really touch multifamily. It's pretty much just individual, single-family projects.
So why did you become an investor?
Because in 2015, when it got harder to find flips, I needed to do something to make money, so I started doing that.
Okay, great.
Still flip, and I still have rentals, but.
And are you local?
Yeah, I live in Honolulu.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Chris Azaretto. I got into note investing and lending because one of my previous business partners actually forwarded me an email from him, and I was like, "What is a note?" No joke. I literally stood at my computer. I was like, "You can buy somebody else's mortgage." I didn't know that. You could create a mortgage on your own. Didn't know that. So I took about 60 days, and I found every free resource that I could find on YouTube and cold calling people on Google, and learned all about the space. So what I do now is I actually fund mortgages for buyers who typically don't qualify for a traditional FHA or VA mortgage. The way that I like to phrase it is, if anyone here is familiar with seller financing, I basically do that, except I don't ever own the property. I'm just funding the loan at the table at closing, and then I actually hold the mortgage, and all the borrower's P&I payments come to me. So I'm basically the bank at that point. So that's what I do now full time. I've started doing some short-term flips. It's a little bit beyond my risk appetite, to be honest, but I'm dabbling. Yeah. So I have 2 underway right now, and I'm enjoying it. But my main business is private lending.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Gomez-Lagata. My background is a little bit different than y'all, so I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes. So I have been lending my whole career. But I was an investment banker up in New York, so I did major corporate loans, like hundreds of $1 million type of deals. And then from New York, I came down to Fort Worth to go work with one of my clients, and I was CFO of an energy company that was extremely active in mergers and acquisitions, financings, etc. And then I took them into bankruptcy, sold all the assets, and then I worked for a turnaround and restructuring firm. And then one of my clients had asked me to be CFO of another company. So my background is very corporate. I've lent my whole career. I've structured deals my whole career. And my last CFO role, COVID happened. And I sat back and said, I'm working for somebody else. I'm rolling in and out of bed. I'm tired of the public company life. What am I going to do? And so my husband and I looked at each other. He was working at a large private equity shop preparing them for an IPO. And I said, we're gonna go do this for ourselves. I'm gonna start a credit platform and I'm gonna go do this. And so that's what I've been doing. So I've been doing investing for the last 3 years on a platform called Olive Cove Partners, and where our investment strategy is to invest in different opportunities that provide downside protection with the appropriate risk-adjusted returns. And real estate really checks so many of those boxes, and I can, as we kind of discuss it, I can highlight why. But for us, it checks all of those boxes. So that's kind of a bit of my background, why I do what I do. And my primary loans is I do only investor loans when I originate paper. Unlike you, I don't want to go through an RMLO. My sponsors or my operators don't want or have the time to go through traditional lending sources to be able to close on a deal. And so one of my value add is I'm super fast. I failed to mention my husband's also an attorney, so we have our forms of documents ready to go. So once I do my diligence on a deal, my borrowers that I have done several deals with, they can call me on a Thursday and I can fund Friday morning. So I can be very, very fast. And I do primarily fix and flips. I will do new construction, but you have to be a known borrower with a known product. And then I also will do some land development again with a known borrower, known project. My specific approach is very diligence oriented. Not surprising given my background, I'm very, very diligent on the front end. And then I let everybody do what they do on the back end, right? If you're an operator, you go operate. And so I'm a finance partner, I keep that hat on. You all are the operators, you go do what you do, and we have our separate roles, and we communicate through the process.
And Kevin, just to make sure that the audience caught it, can you explain, do you do short-term, long-term, investors, owner occupants?
So, and I think she would agree, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to hold my note for long term. I mean, you don't really want to do that. So it's all short term stuff. The in and out, typically 6 months.
Okay. And to investors?
Yeah.
Investors, okay.
So it's an interesting dichotomy between what you do and what I do. So I don't do DSCR loans, I don't do rentals, I do fix and flip, I do pure short-term stuff. So I am constantly turning my volume, right? So every 6 months I have a volume where a DSCR loan, you guys, if y'all do a rental, you guys want longer term paper, right? And so what he's saying he does is he originates the paper and then he goes and sells it to have that velocity of capital.
I keep it.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I'm saying they refi out of me.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as they're paying, I don't care. Keep it for as long as they want, but they don't really want to keep 14%. I'll let them have.
Yeah.
And so,
It's risk appetite.
yeah, what it sounds like for both Vanessa and Kevin, they do shorter term loans. And so when I was buying investment properties, this would be a great example for what Kevin just mentioned. I would buy something with short-term debt, short-term private loan, higher interest rates, points. As soon as I closed on the house and started the renovations, I would start applying for my long-term debt.
Exactly.
And so I was only in the higher interest private loan for 2-3 months max, which makes a 10, 12, 14% interest rate a lot more doable because you're not in it very long. So that's the typical strategy for an investor, is to start with the private lending because it allows you to buy the property very quickly, close very quickly, and then, but you are, if it is a rental property, for example, that you want to hold, you are very shortly after that looking to refinance out in the longer term and only holding that private note a very short time. Okay, let's go to the next question. What are the typical loan terms that all of you offer to, I would say, a typical client, or you could distinguish between a repeat borrower versus a new borrower?
So standard for me right now is 2 and 14. I can drop that down a little bit for repeat clients. But yeah, 2 and 14. I run on a 6-month term. There's no prepayment penalty, and I run an extension beyond 6 months for a point every additional 3 months. And it's not amortized, interest only,
Interest only monthly?
monthly.
What about LTV? Like, will you fund the whole project?
Yeah, I'll fund the whole project. The LTV's you kind of talked about this, it's diligence-based thing, right? So all I really care about is, am I in this sounds terrible, but like, the borrower gets hit by a bus, where am I at, right? Like, if I have to take this back, where does that put me? And if I'm comfortable with that, it's usually somewhere between 70 and 75. If you can buy it and fit that entire scope of work within that LTV, I'll fund you the whole project. I don't care, because again, part of that is the less money I have to take from you, the more money you have to keep paying me.
I say it a little bit different. What I say is, I wanna make sure there's enough money in it for me and you.
Right.
Right, at the end of the day. So you have to buy right, you have to rehab right, and if you do those two things, we're gonna make a lot of money together.
Right.
Right?
Go ahead, Chris.
So I'm obviously very different operating model than Kevin and Vanessa. So my loans are typically, they're actually Dodd-Frank compliant, qualified mortgages. So I can actually go to a bank and pledge the paper and just keep a spread from the borrower's payment to me to my payment to the bank. And then I'm also creating equity because I'm lending on a 30-year loan. Interest rates are typically 11.5% to 12.5% right now. It does depend on credit score of the borrower. I'm doing 12-month bank statement analysis, so there's a lot of due diligence. There's a full underwriting package that comes with it. My LTVs are typically 85 to 80%. So I definitely, and they're not rehab projects. These are livable homes that are they're market worthy, right? And if I do have to take it back, because my goal is to not take a house, right? I want to do good underwriting and I want to lend to a good borrower who's going to make their monthly payments. But if I do have to take a house back, I want it to be relatively turnkey, right? I'm not looking to come in and now have to rehab the whole house. But my loans are 30, I offer 20, 25, and 30-year full amortizing loans. There's no prepayment penalty, there's no balloon. And typically the lifespan of our loans are 5 to 7 years. So that's, when someone's gonna own a house, buy a house, move in, and then potentially the refi or sell eventually. And then I don't do any IO, and
Do you escrow?
yeah, we escrow, absolutely. And then all of my loans are serviced by a third-party servicing company. And then this isn't legally required, but I really push the borrower to set up automatic monthly ACH payments. So it's on the first of the month, it just automatically debits from their account.
Do you have your borrowers pay service or do you pay service?
Borrowers pay service. And that's about $35 a month for the borrower, depending on the servicer.
And do you work with like I-10 borrowers, gig workers? Like
It's
what's the typical demographic?
Mainly I-10, and then some self-employed as well. Yeah. If anyone has any follow-up questions to terminology, please ask, because 9 months ago, I would have no idea what I would say. So
What is I-10?
I-10 means individual tax identification number, which means that it is a foreign national who does not have a US citizenship.
Hence, they're going to him.
So this
Yeah.
is somebody who wants to buy a house to live in it and can't qualify for traditional lending. So that is your target market.
Correct, and there's actually a lot of competition in the space with actual banks. There's a lot of FDIC insured lenders who do this, do what I do. Their borrowing box is just a little bit more strict than mine is. And if there's one box that they can't tick for a borrower, then that borrower gets basically not kicked, but moved to the private market and placed with somebody like me. And that's why my business exists.
Are you considered QM deals or non-QM deals?
They're QM, yeah. The only deals that I've done that are non-QM, which means non-qualified mortgage, is because the loan officer, or the loan originator from, we call it a broker, to my RMLO, their origination points exceeded 3%. That's the only thing they paid non-QM.
So I have my list to make sure I don't forget, but I know my terms pretty well. So my average deal is about $250,000. I will do smaller, but I go up to about $750,000. I do not like to do high-end fix and flips. It's not what I like to do. I like my ARVs to be somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. I think that's a very attractive market. I do 6-month deals. I do 3 1-month extensions, and each month costs $1.25. And I do it that way because I want my borrowers to be focused on my project, not the 5 other projects they have going on. And so when I underwrite a deal up front, we very much talk about what the scope of work is, what the timeline is, and we determine together what the maturity will be. Some deals are 7 months and we adjust the rate to make the return requirements that I have internally. But generally speaking, 6-month deals with 3 1-month extensions, and they're expensive. I like to fund 100% of the deal. So I like to fund the purchase price and the rehab. I don't like there to be other debt on the capital structure because I don't wanna deal with somebody else at the end of the day. On my rehab funds, I will fund the title company 100%. They will send me back the rehab dollars. I put them in a separate escrow account, and I fund all rehab draws out of that separate account. I fund draws within 72 hours of draw request, and it is a reimbursement. So you come to me and you say, I've spent $7,500 on XYZ, here are the pictures, here are the receipts, and then I reimburse you back those dollars. As I mentioned earlier, we have our own documents, so I am very quick from a documentation perspective, and so that helps me close quickly. Our rates are between 2 and 4% on an origination fee and 10 to 12% on an annual fee basis. The rates will depend on borrower's experience, it will depend on ARV to an LTV, it will depend on whether it's cash pay on a monthly basis, all paid on the back end. So it really kind of depends on the terms, will determine where I come out on the rate. Generally speaking, for a new borrower, no matter what, we are on 3 and 12. I do like sponsors to have skin in the game, so I do like closing costs to be paid with cash so that I know you're just as focused on the deal as I am. Let's see, LTVs are typically low 70s, so call it 75 and below. I will look at something a little bit higher, but that just, I want more money from you guys in it, right? So that I know you guys are committed to it. And if it is, because I do investor deals, I do typically lend to a entity, not an individual, and I do require personal guarantees from all of the individuals who have an economic interest in the entity.
And I don't.
And I do make our borrower sign a business purpose affidavit, and if I happen to have an investor that doesn't have an LLC, I make them sign a non-hosted affidavit. Yeah.
Since I forgot to put it on the list, we'll go to Kevin and Chris again. What price range are you most comfortable working with?
Under 300. I think it just opens you, I think you open yourself up to, and I don't want to generalize, but like generally speaking, I'm going to do it anyways. Most of my borrowers are relatively new investors, and you start playing in that space of $1 million properties, and the quality of work has to be so high that by and large, it's not going to be there. It's just a lot easier to sell cheaper houses, and really you don't make any more money on the bigger ones. Nobody makes any more money on the bigger ones, and the quicker they turn, the quicker I can charge more points and fees.
Our business, as you're probably not surprised, is it's a capital velocity game, right? So you're playing the net interest margin game, we're playing a velocity game at the end of the day. So that's where you hear both of us saying, we want to turn that capital, we want 6-month type of paper, because we are earning our fees mostly from the origination fees. At one point I did not mention that I want to, and I'm curious what you guys do as well, or what you do, is I do charge a minimum interest. So as Emily was mentioning earlier, she would go out and get private money, and she'd try to pay off her private money within 2 to 3 months. Depending on my deal size will depend on my minimum interest. So if it's $250,000 and up, it's a 3-month, and then depending on the size, it goes down 4, 5, 6. Because at the end of the day, the work that we put in up front is, there's a certain level, and so if the deal's like $700,000, I'm still putting in the same effort to do a $100,000 deal versus a $250,000 deal, and I weigh that with my minimum interest requirement.
I don't have a minimum interest. The second you pay off the loan, the second you stop paying interest.
I've had some deals pay off in like 3 days. I've had some deals pay off in a month.
Yeah.
I've had deals where I've had to extend, so.
Yeah. Most of mine extend.
Oh, interesting, most of mine don't.
Yeah, most of mine do.
You can leave that mic on, it won't interfere.
Okay, cool.
My price range is anywhere from a sales price, I think the lowest I've done so far is $250, and the highest I've done is $550. It's pretty much in that range.
Okay, next question. Can you share a success story or a case study from one of your private lending experiences?
Yeah, I think, and I think you would agree. Generally speaking, the path is, I like my borrowers to sort of like, I guess, way to put it would be like age out of me, like not need me anymore, right? So for some reason, They went to the bank, said, hey, I wanna start doing deals, and the bank said no. So they called me, and you start doing 3, 4 of them, and then the bank says yes, and they don't need me anymore. And so that's happened a million times, where somebody will do 4 or 5 deals, whether they're flips or rentals, and then all of a sudden they can go to the bank and they don't have to pay 2.5 points. They don't have to pay 14% anymore. They can go to the bank and they don't call me anymore, and to me, that's a success story, right? Like they're building that portfolio on their own. We work together, I made my money, they made their money, and I get to keep doing it in a more traditional way. And then for various reasons, a lot of them come back. I've used hard money before. It's easier sometimes, and it's worth the points to not have to mess with the bank. But that would be my thought process on that.
Ooh, my success story. Someone bought a house and I lent it to them, and they make their monthly payments on time. That's great. I get to live there. Let's see.
When your rates will call.
Yeah, right.
I'll light it up.
Yeah, exactly. No, but for real, it would be. I had a gentleman and a husband and wife where the husband was a contractor and his wife was a teacher, and she had W-2 income and he didn't. And long story short was he didn't report all of his income on his taxes, right? Here we are. So he couldn't get approved at a bank, and they actually had another lender lined up that was gonna charge them like 13.5% interest on a 30-year conventional loan, which would be non-QM, by the way. Non-QM just means it's legal, it's just not a qualified mortgage because it's a high-cost mortgage. Yeah. So my loan officer just gave me a call and said, hey, look, this is a great borrower. I've actually done a deal with them previously for their last house that we just sold for them, and they don't want to lose their earnest money and back out of this deal. Can you do this at a lower interest rate than 13.5%? And I was like, absolutely. They put down like 35% on the house too. It was a home run. It was actually one of my first mortgages that I ever did. It happened during the Note Expo, actually, yeah. And I would say that's a big success story for me because it was, I think, my first loan, and everyone won in that deal. It just worked out really well.
So I'm gonna give y'all two, because, so one is, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my borrowers. I'm not everybody's lender, and I don't wanna be. I want between 5 and 10 lenders borrowers that come on a consistent basis. And a little bit like you, if my borrowers are not relationship oriented, they're not the right borrowers for me. If somebody's just trying to get like a 2 and 8 deal or a 1 and 8 deal, and they keep on coming asking me to lower the rates, like it's not a long-term relationship for me, right? I put in a lot of time and effort into the relationship, into doing the analytics, and effectively I become my sponsor's chief investment officer. I help them think through issues. They will call me on different deals. Actually, Pal asked me the other day, he's like, why do you spend so much time with your borrowers? And it's because I want you guys to be successful. Like, it is super important to me that we all make money together, and given my 20 plus years of experience lending money, I want to bestow that, I want to share that with you. Some people want it, some people don't. And if you don't want it, I'm fine with it. Like, there's plenty of people who do want it. So I say I'm not the lender for everybody, and I will give an example of where I started with a couple who work out of Cleburne, and we started with 3 and 12. We've now done 8 homes. We're now at 2 and 11. They're about to step down to 2 and 10. They've had great success on their flips. There's a house that I see that needs a buyer. I tag them. They then bring me the deal. I fund it and close it. So we have this back and forth relationship, and I really like that. They play in a little bit slower price market, but it's that repeat. I was just on the phone with them yesterday 3 times. They're like, Vanessa, I have this deal. I'm thinking about it this way. And maybe we're thinking about being creative with the seller, and what do you think about this? And how would you do this? And I like that dialogue. I like helping people reach their goals. And if I can be a part of that, that's super rewarding for me. So that's kind of a success story. But I would say that there are things that go wrong. I'll give you an example. So this is more of like a case study where I had a borrower in the Dallas area, and we did a 1-year deal. And I knew from up front it was long. but she had several other projects, so she wanted a little bit more time to get some of her other projects done and then focus on this. Well, guess what happened? The market significantly moved and she went way over budget. And so she was in it an extra 40 grand, and the market had significantly moved. And what I would say is, you know, we talked through it, we came up with a plan. Ultimately, she had another project because the market moved everywhere. And ultimately, we cross-defaulted, so both of her deals, we came to the table and we talked about what the solution would be. And the solution was, I got my capital out and an 8% return on the house in Dallas, and then on the other house, and she lost all of the equity she had put into that house. And then on the other house, I got my return, my capital, and then some of that made up for the loss of return on my other project. But we agreed that no matter what, if time took longer, I would pay all the taxes associated with the homes to keep them going until we could sell. And so it doesn't always go the way we want it to, right? But being able to, you know, we really respect her as a borrower, still do deals with her because she was very committed. She didn't leave me in the lurch with the house just sitting there that wouldn't sell in a tough market. She was also an agent, so she just kept on marketing and trying to find the buyer to get it moved. I would say that also we had some interesting things, like a buyer came in and did a pressure test on the pipes, and it was cast iron and it busted the pipe, so she had to put in some more money to get them lined and all kinds of stuff, right? So as a lender, things don't always go right, and knowing that you go into it, knowing that it doesn't always go right, that's okay. If you go into it thinking it's all going to be peaches and cream, just be prepared for the unexpected, and it does happen. So that's where your legal docs are super important. That's where I was able to cross default, and we were able to come to the table and work out something that worked out for both of us.
I did want to kind of piggyback on what Vanessa said. I think it matters more on the front end, because again, those one-year deals with the market shifts, you can't due diligence that out at the beginning, right? But there's an element of, from a lender and an investor standpoint, we're on the same team here. And I think the other thing, I don't know where most of your clients source their deals, but most of my people, they're coming from wholesalers, right? And those wholesalers, by and large, have no incentive to tell them the truth. And most of these borrowers, they can't run their own comps. Most of them aren't licensed. So they just trust what the wholesaler tells them. And that due diligence on the front end, between myself and I'm sure you're the same way, hey, these comps are terrible, right? They're telling you ARV's X, when in reality it's here. And so if you can buy it here, we have a deal. But if I'm just looking at it from a points and fees standpoint, that borrower is going to get killed on their first deal and they're never going to call me back.
That's exactly right. So I actually have access to the MLS in the DFW area, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. So doing your comps up front, right, is super, super important. That's that diligence and making sure you don't over-lend on an LTV basis is super important. But you're exactly right, and that's where I said, I want you guys to make a ton of money, because then we're gonna do deal after deal after deal after deal after deal, right? That's what I tell all of my borrowers, right? We're in this together.
Susan?
Ask all the stupid questions. When you're saying 210, 311, I'm
Loan origination and interest rate? Exactly.
okay.
2 points
Cost of it.
and 10% interest, or 2 points and 11% interest.
And so on a 6-month deal, for example, I'll make, let's just call it's a 2 and 10. I'll make 2 points on the origination and assuming they have it outstanding for a full 6 months, I'll make 5 points on an annual. So that 6 month, I made a 7% return. And then, to the point of redeploying the capital, I want then another loan ready to be lined up as soon as I get paid off, because then I'll make another 2 points, and then 5. And so where I don't go up to 14%, but my internal targets are mid-teen unlevered returns.
And I just want to give a case study.
Unlevered? What does that mean? So he does a loan, and then he goes to the bank, and he borrows money against that loan. That's levering that asset, where what I'm talking about is I'm effectively investing all just equity dollars.
And just to give another case study, similar to Vanessa's, when I was flipping houses, we did 25 houses, and on one, I lost money. But my private lender was fully paid back. And I did that because of relationships. And so I was on the other side of the coin, and I said, I want to preserve this relationship with this private lender. So even if it's coming out of my pocket and I'm not profiting on this deal, the private lender got their money back, and they are still on my speed dial today. And it's because of that relationship. And so as an investor, if something does go wrong, the advice is to make the private lender, or communicate with the private lender, obviously, and make sure you come to an agreement, because that relationship is so critical that will they can last for decades through your investing career.
It was really interesting because it was a couple, and she was the real estate agent. He helped with the rehab, and he wanted to walk away from it. He's like, just give her the keys, just do it, give her the keys. And the wife was like, absolutely not. And she was the one, I mean, I could feel the internal battle between the couple. And that's where I go back to, like, then we finally was like, what's the issue? And she's like, I have no more money to put into this house, and taxes were coming up. And communicating and figuring out what her major issue was allowed her to, we said, we'll take that burden off of your shoulders. Don't worry about paying taxes, because frankly, I'm gonna protect my interest anyway.
Right.
So I was like, whatever, I'll pay the taxes, fine. And she felt relieved, and that allowed her to stay committed to finding the right buyer. So that communication and that open dialogue and figuring out the pushes and pulls between the borrower and the lender is super important, because that's how you structure win-wins for both parties.
To that same point too, like it goes both ways, where, have you ever had to foreclose on one?
No.
So I have, I've only had to do it once, and it was frustrating because it's like, this person was getting information from like the peanut gallery, right, your family, and I'm like, just sign the deed in lieu, and then you don't have a foreclosure on your record, like, you're gonna lose it either way, I'm gonna take it either way, just sign the deed in lieu. And she's like, all right, I'll come sign the deed in lieu. And then that day came and she didn't show up. It's like, okay, like, and I had a ton of equity in it, so like I was buying it back for myself at the foreclosure auction anyways, and I'm like, you're gonna lose it. And so she lost it anyways, and she has a foreclosure on her, a bankruptcy on her record, because that's what they ended up doing. So she's got a foreclosure and a bankruptcy when she could have just given me the keys, and she didn't lose any less money by not giving me the keys. It's like,
So it's so interesting, whatever side you're gonna play, whether you wanna play the borrower or you wanna play the lender, it's the communication, right? Like, and as a lender, know what your options are to offer your borrowers, right? Like a deed in lieu, right? Let's amend, let's figure out your pressure points, let's figure out how to extend this to the point where we get it sold. I've taken over a property where I've become the equity owner, and ultimately then did seller finance because there was partnership issues, right? So as a lender, you're not in this box, right? We're not a bank where you have to stay in this box and your only action is to go through foreclosure or hold it, right? Be creative and come up with solutions that work for you and your counterparty, whether you're the borrower or the lender.
Great discussion. So the next question that I want to talk about is, what do you see are the current opportunities and challenges in the private lending market today?
I don't know if it's just like been happenstance or what, but I think by and large in my career, I've seen when everybody is talking about X, you should go do Y. And I think that's what I've been seeing is like, everyone's been talking about how there's no deals, it's super tight, the market's terrible, and that's just not the case. Like if you're putting a good product out there, it's gonna rent, it's gonna sell. If you price it right, it's gonna move. And I think right now is an opportunity for people to jump in on deals that 2 years ago would have sold in 5 seconds for above ask price, but like they're not right now, but they're still deals. And so I would say again, it comes down to due diligence, right? Like if the numbers work, they work, and it doesn't really matter where it came from. So like if everybody else over here is saying, okay, now is not a good time because of whatever, that's not true. Like the deals are still out there, you just have to find them and not be scared.
All right, opportunities. So for what I do, the opportunities are really based on credit. How tight is the credit market in general? Are banks willing to lend? So for me, that's a great opportunity because I can have more borrowers who need private capital. Because banks are they're tightening their credit boxes of what they're lending at, they're also tightening their LTVs. So whereas a lot of programs that I can technically compete with lenders, they would do 5% down. Now they're doing 10, and I'm guessing in 6 to 9 months they're going to be doing 15% only. And that really, really eliminates a lot of borrowers in general, not just the borrowers who I lend to. So to me, that's an opportunity because I am willing, depending on the house and the borrower and their earnings, like I may be willing to go a little bit above 85% LTV. Maybe, it does depend on the submarket. The challenge would be probably everybody's right now is just that macroeconomic uncertainty, right? Where are we going? What's happening with this election? Where is the housing market as far as appreciation or depreciation, trading volume? Those are all the things that I get worried about as far as challenges go. And then also credit, right? And if I'm going to a bank and they typically love the loans that I do because they're fully underwritten qualified mortgages. They will actually buy the loan for me if I ask them to take it, and they'll buy it at a premium, which is great. I can actually make money on the loan selling it. I don't even have to take the house back. But the more and more conversations I have with traditional banks, they're tightening up their credit to everybody, right? I mean, so I think the capital markets are going to be the biggest challenge for what we do.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback, the reason why banks are becoming more and more difficult to extend credit is because they have, at least if it's a community bank, a regional bank, they have a lot of exposure to the commercial space, right? And as a result, they have certain reserve requirements that the government requires that they have. And so because they're having these difficulty or non-performing CRE deals on their books, they have to allocate more capital to that in case those deals default or go bad. And so that reduces the amount of available capital to everybody else, right? So that is, simple terms, why there's a reduction in available capital to the general market, right? So I wrote down what I was thinking as opportunity. I say the rate environment, right? The rate environment at the end of the day, I mean, I think Freddie just came back out and like 30 years are still north of 7%, right? 15 years are high 6s. For your business, that makes it super attractive for somebody to go to private credit, right? At the end of the day, higher rates allow the private market to continue to flourish. So I think there's opportunity from that perspective. I also think that the longer rates are higher from your GSEs, the less sensitive people become to higher rates, right? So if we're at 7% and we've been at 7% for 2 to 3 years, people are gonna be like, 10%, not so bad, 11%, not so bad, right? And I think that the challenge is that we were at low rates for a really, really long time, and we were at stupid low rates for too long, right? And so the challenge is changing people's mindset to realize that 2% rates, 3% rates are unrealistic, right? And I think the real challenge in today's environment is, and I might get on my high horse here, so just you can keep me off here in a second, is I think the real challenge is people's spending habits. At the end of the day, people's spending habits is what's limiting the market. Because if the house is priced right, there is access to capital. It's people's inability to understand what they can and cannot afford. And so, I was super excited when I saw this, right? First time rookie mistakes paper. I have one of my seller finance deals down in Victoria. I keep on getting these offers, right? They don't want to put any money down, and I'm like, okay, you have to escrow. And you have to pay 1 year insurance up front. And they're like, no, I'll escrow taxes, but I won't pay insurance. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this deal because a year from now, I'm gonna come back, you're not gonna be able to have any money in the bank because you spent it all. And people's I think they have a spending problem. We have a spending problem. And I think that's the biggest limitation we have in today's market.
I had a guy yesterday.
I was underwriting a deal yesterday in Louisville, and it looked fine, the ARV was wrong, but I'm like, dude, send me your bank statements. And this dude already had a flip out that he's working on. He had $515 in his bank account, and I'm like, bro, I'm aggressive, but like, that is insane. Like, that is aggressive, first of all, no, but also like, buddy, I think maybe pump the brakes a little bit here, but he was confident.
It's funny that you mentioned spending habits because I get a lot of questions of, can you do a lower down payment? Or can you lower the interest rate? Or whatever it may be, right? Anybody's trying to negotiate. And there are certain points where it's like, you can't afford it regardless.
Right.
You're right, like your realtor is not doing you any help right now. Like they're doing you a disservice. Like you can't afford this house. You need to just shop at a lower price point. We're just very conditioned recently. I mean, last decade and a half, 2 decades, where it's not okay to say no. Right? We hear yes all the time from everybody, from many, just in society, and it's like that's a very limiting factor, right? So I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
I mean, I was talking to my broker down in Victoria on this house, and I literally was like, she can't afford this house. I don't care what she comes back with. Like, at the end of the day, I've asked for what is her job, and what does she make, and what other liabilities does she have? The broker's not even, like, trying to sell the buyer, right, to me on the seller finance, terms, on the creative terms. I'm like, you're not even trying to make me want to. You just keep on coming back with a number. I'm like, you can at least sell her a little bit, right? And try to argue why she can afford the house and why I should take this offer. But that just told me, and that's exactly what I told my broker. I was like, the broker's doing a disservice, not explaining to this buyer that not escrowing taxes and insurance is not a good thing for both people, right? Not putting any money down and paying full offer, and making me pay out cash to pay the broker, the buyer's commission. I was like, you're insane, right? Because she wants a house and she can only afford X, Y, Z. Okay, but this is not the house for you. You can't afford it. And I think people are so scared to say those words and to say no. And it's unfortunately where we are.
That's a consistent message that we heard from Gary Keller at Family Reunion. Pam Anderson just mentioned it this morning, that credit card debt is skyrocketing and they're having to churn away potential borrowers because of their credit card debt. So if you're looking for a topic of conversation with your clients, that may be a really good one to kind of do a session on, or bring in an industry professional to talk about ways to reduce credit card debt, or just focus on spending less. Budgeting, that kind of thing.
Well, I think the budgeting part, I mean, you and Adam have done a ton of work on this stuff, right? Like the budgeting part and walking your buyers through what it actually takes to own a home and how expensive it is. And insurance right now is crazy expensive, and everybody should expect it to increase again next year. It's expensive to own a home, and I don't think people want to talk about the realities of it.
I know we need to move on, but I talk about that a lot with a lot of my clients because primarily I'm a lender, but primarily I'm an investor. So I own and manage my own rent houses. And I was talking to I have a friend who sold his plumbing company. He came in some cash. He was trying to buy rentals, and we're working through the numbers. And I'm like, hey, looks like this kind of down payment. You're at this kind of IRR. Probably about $200 a month is what you're gonna cash flow. He's like, oh no, I was thinking like $1,000 a month. I was like, no. That doesn't happen. Like, that doesn't happen anymore. And then you also have to factor in, right, but then water heater explodes. Well, then you didn't cash flow now for 10 months, right? You have to factor that in and have these real conversations about, like, long term, this is a great way to make money. It's a great way to become wealthy. But, like, day to day, especially rent houses, it's expensive. Most of the time, they don't make money. Like, month to month, they don't make money. And you have to be prepared for that. You have to tell your clients that. It's telling the truth.
And that's where I tell everybody, I'm not the lender for everybody, because I tell everybody the truth. And some people like it and some people don't, right? I can't tell you how many times I will look at a deal and say, I don't like to say no. Like, it's hard for me to say no. So I find a way to say yes, right? Which means these are the terms in which I will say yes, right? And so many people think they have this amazing deal, and when you put the numbers to it, it just doesn't make sense.
Thank you. So any emerging trends or niches in private lending that investors should be aware of? Kind of an abstract question, but anything that you see coming down the line, any changes, things like that?
At least from where I stand, and I'm the wrong guy to ask this question too, because I just kind of hang out by myself. I don't network, I don't know what other lenders are doing. For me, no, and I'm just doing the same thing I've always done, just assessing deals and offering rate term, that's about all I got, I don't have a good answer for that, sorry.
Any like trends with like how people are flipping houses? Like any like,
No,
any,
just
any
with,
like ways?
Lending, like
Just lending.
you kind of mentioned, you touched on, you think it's gonna get tighter, you think the down payments are gonna go up. Is there anything else that you may see, that you see, any other changes to the whole industry? If not, that's
I mean,
okay.
it's kind of evolving all the time. I mean, I've once I started doing what I do now, I would say that my business model probably changed or tweaked a little bit for like every 90 days for the first year or so. Just because I kept learning more and I kept implementing new things or meeting new people who did something a different way, or meeting a traditional banker who was like, oh, you should try to structure your line of credit this way, right? And it just would always kind of change how I operated or or the terms that I lent on. But as far as like niches go, to be quite frank, I think that I've found a pretty good niche. There's not a lot of people who do what I do. And the returns are through the roof. Like once I add leverage to my loan, my cash on cash returns are in the mid-20s every year. You know, and it's people are like, how do you do that? And I was like, I just tried a little bit. I didn't do, and this is not rocket science. I literally built a little Excel sheet. I was like, all right, well, this is the payment that I'm receiving, and this is the payment that I'm gonna pay, and this is the difference of if the loan that I received and the loan that I made, which is my equity in the deal, right? Well, the spread is like, I'm getting almost 25% of my cash back every year, and I'm not doing anything. I don't
But
want
you're
to
using
rental.
leverage.
Yeah, of course, yeah, that's what I'm saying, my leverage
That's
returns.
leverage, I mean, it's levered returns or mid twenties,
Right,
like,
and it's just a niche, that's what I was saying, is like,
but
it's
you also
different.
have to, I mean, which I love, right? Like you have to have the ability to make sure you underwrite the right way, you have all your documentation in place, you are then having the credibility to go to the bank, you provide them packages, continue to update them on your portfolio, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that you have done to earn that mid 20% type of return.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, and that's one thing, you know, kind of one of my comments is like, you are making it happen, right? It is not a passive, it is not a, here's $100 grand and go make this work. Like you are actively managing your business to make those types of returns.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking as far as a niche goes,
Yes.
it's become more, I'm getting a lot more questions about it than I was a while ago.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people are like, oh, you're a hard money lender. I'm like, not quite. I'm actually just a lender. Like my churn isn't high, right? I'm just recapitalizing when I bring my loan that I've made to the bank and pledge it. I'm just getting the cash back. And so I can redo it, just do it over again. So I would say I think that's a niche in private lending that investors should be aware of. Yeah, I hope it doesn't get more popular, but maybe it will. But yeah, that would be my response to that.
So mine is land. I am seeing a lot more people wanting to develop land, and wanting financing for land. And from my perspective, it makes it really hard because land is really hard to value. And so that's a trend I see, it's a trend I don't love, and so that's what I'm seeing. So from my perspective, what I look for in that trend is proximity to city centers, right? I look at, what kind of utilities exist and what they plan to do to the utilities. I look for, if you're just gonna be selling paper lots, do you have relationships with larger home builders to be able to sell those paper lots? What you're all in it for. There's just a lot of diligence questions in lending to people who want to borrow on land. And I would say clearly the LTVs are not in the 70s, they're in the 50s and below. And clearly there's things that you can do to tweak that, what the LTVs, right, whether it's an appraisal or, different components depending on how far developed the property is, how close it is to city center, all kinds of stuff. But a trend I'm seeing is a lot of people are focusing on land. And I would say that, these things, allow there to be a lot of gurus out there. And there's a lot of people listening to a lot of these gurus on here, and there's a lot of talk about land and how easy it is to make a lot of money on land. And you're smirking over there because you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just be careful. As a lender, land can be a big hole. So,
You say hold or a hole?
hole,
No deal.
deep
Like a
hole.
money pit.
Vanessa, let me ask you this. What is your exit strategy on land and new construction? 'Cause I don't touch those for the reason of, I don't wanna have to take back something that I don't wanna mess with. And so like, I don't wanna finish up someone's poorly plotted land development.
It's a great question. So let's talk about both of them. On both of them, I don't know if you remember what I said, is I lend to somebody who I've lent to before, somebody who has experience, right? So typically on new construction, the person has already done a new construction in the same area and somebody else financed it, right? So that then I can see what does the finished product look like, who's gonna be the general contractor, how long did it take, and what did they sell it for, right? So there's now an established market on new construction in the same neighborhood. So again, diligence and parameters, right, are very important. So on new construction, you have to check certain boxes for me to be comfortable to lend on new construction. And again, I also don't love the higher price points, right? When you start talking north of $500,000 on new construction, it's a very different price point. There's a lot of what the buyer is looking for in that end product. And a lot of times, developers don't necessarily have that mindset. So I shy away from higher end new construction. I love that, call it 200 to 250 kind of price range on new construction. Land development, my takeout is usually, so my takeout is usually either a builder coming in and buying the paper lots, which is why I was mentioning, you know, what kind of what will the utilities look like? And do they have relationships with the home builders to be able to actually come and find somebody to take out the paper lots? If it is truly raw land and developed, I've had, I'll give you an example, because I think case studies are super easy. So there was a piece of property in Carrollton, it was 2 lots, somebody wanted to subdivide it into 3. They kept on telling me this is worth close to $900,000. I was like, that's awesome. I think it's not. And so I said, that, you know, they were asking for like $750,000. And I said, I will lend you $550,000 because I said I can sell this for I can get out at $550 plus, so I felt pretty comfortable. But I said, not only that, I will do this when you keep on telling me there's all these, you know, home builders that want this and that they're super crazy about it. Bring me a signed tract contract for somebody who wants to buy this subdivided land. So, and it can say, subject to, you know, city approving, you know, the division of the plot. And they hawed and hemmed, and I said, do it, and I will lend you the money. Because I mean, $550 is a pretty big ticket.
Yeah.
So, guess what? They came to me with a tract contract. It wasn't $900,000, it was $825. I said, cool,
There you go.
fine. So it's a way to, I didn't want to say no, but trying to think about different ways to structure a deal that ultimately gets me comfortable, right? So I said, this is my limit on what I was willing to lend it at, and I want to know that my takeout is already in place.
Great examples. So this is the last question before we open it up for question and answer. What advice would you give to someone considering a private loan for the first time?
So, if I was talking specifically to this group, I would say all of us are realtors, we all should know how to run comps, and most of you probably suck at it. So get better at running comps so that you can actually trust your own numbers and actually know what a deal is a deal. Most realtors I talk to, just horrific at running comps, and that's their biggest downfall, is they don't know a deal from not a deal until someone like me tells them. And they should be able to do that upfront.
Do you think that's the issue because they don't know the cost of what it takes to flip it?
No, I think they're genuinely bad at running comps. Like, I think they just do a bad job. I think a lot of times, especially when somebody gets excited about getting their first deal, if what they're looking for is, okay, if ARV is 325, it's a deal. So now they're looking for 325. And if everything they're seeing tells them 285, they just toss those comps out and they look for those ones that fit that 325 box to make this deal fit, and they toss out the ones that really they should have looked at and recognized this is actually where the number is. And that doesn't mean you can't go back and renegotiate or get a better deal, but I think most of the time the biggest mistake I see is the ARV is pumped up for whatever reason and they don't want to believe that it's not what they think it is or what they want it to be.
Let's see, so if you're considering a private loan, I'm gonna answer this from the side of the lender, not the borrower, is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, do your homework, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions to people because that is where you're gonna get your answers. You know, I look at a lot of like mortgage applications, and I look at a lot of bank statements, and that's all good and great, you need it, right? But more often than not, I'm talking to my loan officer, just asking like, hey, what's their story? What do they do? Why are they here versus at a bank? Because they make all this money, it's on their bank statements, there's other people who do this. They can get cheaper money. So do your homework. And there's a lot of free resources out there. You know, even ChatGPT is helpful. It's not fully reliable, but it's helpful. It'll guide you. It should give you enough information to ask the next question. And you know, watch YouTube videos, call people. Don't be afraid to ask your peers, your colleagues, what they've done. I mean, a lot of the things that I learned have been from conversations. They've just been from me asking questions, people, and not being bashful. Like, you can say, hey, look, I've never done this before. How did you do this? So that would be my response, is just do your homework, and it will pay you many, many, many dividends.
So I like this question, and I took notes on this one. So I'm gonna answer it as if you guys want to be a private money lender. And what I would first say is your money has value. You worked real hard to get it. It's sitting in your bank account. You made the choice to not go spend it. So be really, it has value. And so what I would say is don't become the bank without protections, right? Make sure your documentation is in line. Make sure you're structuring it the right way. If you have concerns, you can structure around it. It is a bilateral transaction, which means you can put and you can determine what the terms are that make you comfortable for that money that you worked really hard for that's sitting in the bank that you're talking about lending. I would also, again, do your homework, ask your diligence, make sure that you're not just doing diligence on the underlying asset, but your borrower, right? Because if something were to go wrong, you need to know who is across the table from you. Is this somebody that you're willing and believe can be rational when something goes wrong? Because you should expect it to go wrong, right? And then last is don't give your money away. I see so many people who have capital in their 401ks or IRAs, and they just want to deploy it. They're like, oh my gosh, I want to make more than 5%. I want to make more than 5%. I'll lend my money for 8 and 1, right? Your money has value. Your knowledge has value. Price it appropriately. Don't give your money away.
So let's flip the ticket and say, what if they want to be a borrower on a private loan for their first time? Then what advice do you have?
Okay, so I love this question. If you want to be a borrower, come prepared to talk about your deal. Come prepared to talk about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, who you're going to use to get your deal done, and what your plan is at the end of the day. I can't tell you how many times I get borrowers that call me and they're like, and I don't mind it, but they're like, oh, well, I was looking at this deal and I'm gonna buy it at a decent price and I think that the reno budget is 30 grand. And I'm gonna send you some pictures. I'm like, great. So I get the pictures and I look at it. There's a hole in the roof. Like the yard looks like, you know what? And I go back and I'm like, and then I ask questions on, you know, you lose money, you should always know. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, foundation, and what's my last one? Yes! Guys, y'all know where the money pits are. Be prepared, right? Because I'm gonna ask you, right? Know where those things stand. I'd also say, make sure your contractors you've worked with before, right? And if you haven't, then I would ask you a question. Do you want to risk your money right? So make sure your contractors, if you haven't worked with them before, make sure they walk the project with you, right? Make sure that you have walked other projects those contractors have done. Understand how many times are they on budget versus off budget. Make them sell themselves to you a bit to make sure that you want to use them. The other thing is, also on contractors, they come in and they're like, put half down and I'll do the work 3 weeks from now.
Yeah.
That's an NFW, that's a no way, that's a red flag. Like, run and find somebody else, right? It doesn't work. So be prepared from your contractor side. And then I would also say,
No, I was gonna follow up.
on the contractor point, yeah, go ahead.
So kind of the same way with comping deals. You can trust someone else's comps, but you have to be able to like really trust yourself and your own numbers. The same thing goes with the contractors. Like you don't have to be your own GC, but when you were talking about being prepared to do your homework, like you don't have to be your own GC, but you should be competent enough to be your own GC if you really needed to. Like you should know what each one of these things costs. You should know, okay, here's the problem. What is the actual reasonable solution? Right? Not just, okay, well, let me call my contractor and see what he says. Like, you should know, because then when he tells you something, you don't know whether or not that's reasonable. And you don't know if there's another solution. So, doing enough homework, whether that's just walking jobs with friends or walking projects that are in the middle of a project, being comfortable enough to know where are the red flags and what are my actual solutions that I can tangibly create instead of just hoping my contractor does right by me.
So I say that is, make sure you have a scope of work, make sure you have a budget allocated to your scope of work, and make sure you have a timeline that makes sense to the scope of work that's put together. And if you have those things put together and I get that package, then I ask, what are you gonna do with this asset? Then if it's a flip, okay, that's easy. But I've had some guys tell me, well, you're my private money for a period of time and then I'm gonna flip into, a DSCR one. I'm like, great, be prepared. I'm like, who's your lender? Have you talked to them? What kind of down payment are they gonna require? What kind of DCR coverage ratio are they gonna require? I start asking all these questions like, well, I don't really have anybody lined up quite yet. I'm like, that's my takeout. Do you think I'm gonna get comfortable lending money to somebody that are gonna have to do all of that heavy lifting on the back end while renovating the place?
Right.
No, come prepared.
Hey, see that?
Yeah.
This is, I'm gonna get a little bit more granular here, because I think that, these are like details and they're high level, but you say the word budget,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
Who here, just raise your hand, knows how to use Microsoft Excel in any capacity, right? So we all have it on our computers. Guys, use it, because it actually will educate you. So like, Vanessa said the word budget, like come prepared. That doesn't mean have them in your head. If you hand a pro forma, and it doesn't have to be some remarkably complex spreadsheet. We're talking 15, 20 rows of, hey, this is the purchase price. Here's the allocation for HVAC, roof. Maybe you got a couple of contracts, you can just take a screenshot of it and paste it into the Excel sheet. Like, you'll see those numbers in front of you, and that, you might not even go to a lender, you're like, oh no, this deal's shit. Like, it's not gonna work. Sorry, pardon my French.
But it's so true.
It's so true. There are so many times where I'm like, oh, this is a great deal. And then I do the math in my head, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then I put it into Excel, and I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, this isn't working. This is not gonna work. And that'll also build credibility with your lenders. They're gonna see like, oh, they did their homework. I'm gonna give them the time of day and challenge them, but also try to help them. So it's just granular, like from a granular perspective, put it into a spreadsheet because it will help you.
To that point on the spreadsheet, I don't know if you felt the same way, but whenever I'm running a project, there's certain things and it's always hardware, like literally like door handles, that I always forget about. Like, I have to replace them on every project, and I swear I always forget about them, and I always forget how much they cost. But because I have an Excel file with line items on there, I put hardware on there at one point, and I put a rough estimate for that, and then I don't forget it when I actually go back in my head. If I'm running rehab numbers, I always forget hardware. But because it's on my file, when I go home and actually run the numbers, I'm like, oh no, there's an extra $2,000 that I forgot about.
Well, I would say when you put it down on paper, you actually sit back, I can't tell you how many spreadsheets I've gotten there, like, payment's gonna be $2,000, I'm like, that's funny.
Yeah.
Payment is not $2,000,
Right.
right? Like, painting a house does not take $2,000.
Right.
It's more than that. Are you gonna paint cabinets? Guess what? It's
They're
super
right
expensive,
there.
right? So when you put it down and you actually put pen to paper, it makes you realize what the true reno budget's going to be, and it also helps you analyze the deal. Like I said, I had a lady call me, she told me, she's like, it was 30 grand reno budget, and I was like, go walk it with the contractor. The contractor comes back and says it's $73,000. $30,000 versus $73,000. That was the number I was expecting to hear based on what I saw from the pictures, but she wanted to do the deal so badly, it was a lot of wishful thinking,
She told
right?
herself, it'll probably be 30.
It'll probably be paper. Put it down on paper.
No, those are great points, and if you came to last month's Investor Club, we did a flipping class, all about flipping, and so we handed out a free flip analyzer. It's an Excel spreadsheet, very simple one, and so if you need that, email me, I will send it to you, it is still free, and it's still available for everyone. And it has a section where you put in the lender's terms, so you put in how many points, you put in the interest rate, you put in how many months you think you're gonna hold the property, the taxes, the insurance, and it will calculate whether this property should profit or not. So if you need that, email me, I can get that to you. And just to comment on something that Kevin mentioned, where from wholesalers, one of the biggest, and this goes along with what Vanessa said too, one of the biggest issues I've seen in the past where people have asked me to just look at their numbers is they have trusted what a wholesaler sent over in terms of rehab budget and after repair value, ARV. And so if you're getting that information from somebody else, it always needs verified. And wholesalers are known to, the stigma is that they underestimate the rehab and they overestimate the after repair value. And so those are the two biggest factors that go into the spreadsheet that you have to make sure you verify with comps and with walking the property with a contractor before you put your money up and buy this property.
So I'm just gonna add to that, because when as a lender, so putting your lender hat back on, if you wanna be a lender, I actually have a spreadsheet that I have kind of my base case, and I have 2 cases down to the downside, 2 cases to the upside, so I can actually see, and I run my own numbers, so I don't depend on your numbers, I look at my own numbers. I run my own numbers and I see downside and upside case, right? And that's where I say, I wanna make sure there's enough money in it, not only for me, but for you. And when on the downside case, there's not enough money, like, we have a conversation, right? Because I'm running my comps and usually reality is, I think the numbers are closer to middle and down, they think the numbers are middle and up, right? And I wanna make sure on the downside case, there's enough there. So really running those numbers and having a variation and understanding what your spectrum of return can be is super important.
So to that point, that's actually like the entirety of my underwriting process is send me the address, send me the numbers that you think they are, and then I'm gonna look at it and we're gonna have a conversation.
Yeah.
That's the entirety of it.
Be prepared as a lender to do work.
So going off of one thing that was mentioned, if you are interested in being a private lender, and that's the reason that you're here, or that's something that's in the back of your head, KW Wealth, the community, which is $199 a month and is available to all KW agents, has Brett Tanner, who leads KW Wealth, runs a private lending business. And so one of the series that he did recently was a 3-week series, it was 3 one-hour classes, and he opens the curtain on how to start your private lending business. He shares his loan application, he shares his terms, he shares everything regarding his private lending business. So if you are interested in being a private lender and starting that business, KW Wealth could be a great resource to go to learn and just pretty much duplicate what Brett Tanner did to start his.
I built mine from scratch.
Okay, are there any questions and answers? Any Q&As? Yes?
I have a couple questions. I don't know if maybe you went over it at the beginning, I wasn't there. So for a first time borrower, are you, what's like the profile you're looking at? Meaning like, do they have to have a certain credit score, maybe income or something? And the second question will be, can you finance the sale price and the rehab if the person doesn't have like any cash whatsoever?
Just do a quick 10, 15 second summary.
So I think you and I are roughly on the same page here. It's all dependent on the deal. If I can be in an LTV that I'm comfortable with, so between 70 and 75, or I guess under 75, I'll fund the whole project. But if the person has no money in the bank account, again, that comes back to what's the most reasonable solution here. And if they're in a spot where like they didn't budget for AC, or it literally broke during the project, I'm not gonna give them extra money for that, right? They still have to make their payments, and so I would say a borrower really, this is kind of a risky business, and it's probably not one that you should play in if you don't have a little bit of room for disaster.
So just quickly to add on to it, as a first-time borrower, I expect you to have closing costs and to be able to fund $7,500 of the rehab yourself. Okay, so you need a little bit of cash in the bank to float the project. That's how I know you're committed to it.
And to summarize, Kevin and Vanessa both do short-term lending. So short-term, anywhere from 2 to 4 points upfront, so 2 to 4%, one-time fee, and then anywhere from 10 to 14% interest. Chris does long-term lending. So he is working with borrowers that don't qualify for traditional mortgages, that want to buy a house and live in it. And so we have a little bit of variety across the panel here. Any other questions? Yes, Dina?
So this is for Vanessa. Vanessa, you said you like to lend, your sweet spot, I guess, is between 250 and 550. And that includes the rehab on top of that? Okay.
That includes the rehab. So my total loans call it $250, including the rehab, I would lend up to $750, including rehab.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry.
Barbara?
I was gonna say, so you said the meat in the game, what was the terms on that part again? What was the percentage you want the
So I want them to pay closing costs and then be able to fund the first, the rehab of first draw of $7,500. So I have a minimum, if the rehab's like 10 grand, then I'm not gonna say fund 75, I'll bring that down. But usually rehabs are 30,000 plus, so I make you fund, I reimburse and my reimbursement threshold is $7,500. So I know that you have closing costs and at least $7,500 into it.
So what if someone only has so much in their account that they have credit cards that have 50,000 on it, where you can apply repairs or pay on credit cards? Do you ever do anything like that?
So let me make sure I'm understanding your point, which is you come to the table and you say, I've spent, call it $7,500, and you have funded that through credit cards?
No, you have the 75 cash, and then you've got the closing costs. But in addition to repairs and things like that, they could put some of those repairs or material costs on credit cards. Do you consider that?
So I personally like to fund the rehabs.
Okay.
And your next question should be why? And the reason why is because I've lent on the underlying asset. And so as a lender, I want to make sure that the underlying asset those improvements are being made, and in what kind of pattern are they being made, and what succession are they being made. So I like to lend 100% purchase and rehab. I have borrowers that come in and say they want to fund the rehab themselves. What I then put is in my documentation that they either provide me on a consistent basis reporting on where they stand from a rehab perspective, or I have the right at any time to ask for updates.
Johnny?
My question is for Chris. I'm dealing with two buyers. One family, it's a single income family, and he works as a nurse. They don't have too much in the bank, I think like 17,000. They're preparing themselves to try to save more, but I feel like in the circumstance they're in currently, they're already paying a rent. There's no penalty to break the rent, and they can just transition it to a home. Their current FICO score, I think, is in the mid-600s. So what would you recommend in that scenario?
I would always recommend a borrower to go through the traditional route first, always. If they can qualify for an FHA loan and put 3 to 5% down on a house that they can afford the payments on, then they should absolutely do that. Yeah, I would never go straight to the private market. Does that answer your question?
That answered my question for family one. Family
Okay.
two, again, single family, but he is self-employed as a contractor. So showing regular, consistent income, like he's good with his taxes and whatnot, but it might get tricky with availability or opportunity with conventional loans.
Is there
So-
a question?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
so
sorry.
if I were to encourage them to go the private lending route, what would the next steps be?
They report all their income on their taxes?
Yes.
I don't know if I would go the private
I agree.
lending route right away, because you can, I mean, I was a business owner, and the way that I ever bought my first house was through my tax returns. I mean, I didn't have W-2 income or 1099 income or anything like that, and I was able to get a conventional mortgage. So you can still use just your tax returns to get a mortgage. So if they report all their income, they should be fine. If they don't, and they get denied from the bank, then I would go the private route. And I would just make sure you tell them, hey, if you supply your tax returns to a lender, they have to rely on it. Okay, so especially if it's a consumer loan, so the space that I play in, there's a lot of red tape, right? Because there's a lot of protections for a consumer, and in general, you have to look at what they give. You have to base your underwriting on the most conservative documentation that you have. So if you know that they don't report all their income on their taxes, which is common in that space, it is what it is, then maybe have them not go the private route, or not go the traditional route. But if they do, then I would just go that direction for sure.
The only thing I would add to that, it depends on what their income, like how consistent it has been, right? So if you're going back on your tax returns, right? If all of a sudden last year they had very little, this year they had a lot, and so a traditional bank will look at that variability and look through. They will try to look through it, but it will be harder for them. They will naturally go to the lowest common denominator, right? Because they will say this was an outlier this year and their income is on the lower side. So I think you probably need to sit down with them and see what their tax returns look like over the last 3 to 5 years, just to get a sense and see if they're gonna be successful in the traditional route, and if not, then the more private money route.
Okay, because at this point, what you're saying is they're not looking at the blended rate of return.
So most, I mean, from an RMLO perspective, they wanna see at least 2 years of consistency, right? So from that perspective, if you have large variability within those 2 years, they're not just gonna take the most recent year and say that's what it's gonna be go forward, right? They're gonna wanna see some, if it's not consistent, they're gonna wanna see more information.
Okay, I think that's kind of where we're at with the current client and the lender. So they're looking at the current one, it's higher, but then the previous year was not.
And if they wind up going the private route, I mean, it's not a marriage, you know, like if it's a qualified mortgage, like there's no prepayment penalties and there's no balloon payments. So like if they see a house that they wanna get, they can pay the higher interest rate for a year or two, get their tax returns in order, and then refi.
That is
2
an
years.
excellent,
It
excellent
happens
point,
all
right?
the time, it's like,
Excellent.
yeah, and it's the incremental cost of the interest that they're gonna pay over, even if it's 5 years, is less than probably 2 things for sure. It's less than they're gonna pay in taxes if they report all their income, honestly. And it's probably less than the appreciation of the house in that incremental time period.
So what I would say, and I'm just adding
Yeah,
this.
please.
So what people say is refinancing your existing mortgage makes sense if the new rate you can get is over, call it 0.5% lower than where it was above. That will cover the closing cost and all kind of the sunk cost in refinancing. So for example, if Chris's paper is at 11%, 12%, whatever it's at, and if you go to a traditional market where it's 7%, that difference in 4 to 5 points, 3 to 4 points, whatever that is cost effective for them to refinance. So I think it's a very, very excellent point. Get the private money, get the house, show the consistency from an income perspective on the taxes, and then go to the traditional route.
That way they can show the consistent.
That is exactly right.
And the fact that they already own the house is huge for,
It's a lot easier to refi.
yeah, it's a lot easier to refi than to get a new.
Just make sure it's not a cash out refi, because the rates might be a little bit higher than last.
Okay, last question.
As a private lender, what are your terms?
So we went over that. Let me
Okay.
send you the recording, because that was a pretty
Yeah.
big section of the first part. So email me and I'll send you the recording. And then I'm gonna go through, because I forgot to ask all of you, what is the best way for somebody to get a hold of you to inquire about private lending, whether it's a website, an email, or a phone number? Because I forgot to put that on the slides.
Yeah, so this is part of the reason why I'm terrible at this. I don't have social media, I don't really have anything, so I guess, email Emily, I guess.
Okay.
Does everybody have Emily's contact information?
You should get
I don't know the best way to do
I know.
this. Do you want me to just say my phone number? You can call me, you can text me.
Either one, website or
Yeah.
email.
But I do have a website, it's actually really simple, it's sellerfinancetx.com.
Actually, I have a website too, I forgot about that.
It's probably not updated.
It's not.
Okay.
It's just kdb-funding.com.
Okay,
KDB, actually it's not a hyphen, what's this thing?
an underscore.
Underscore funding.com.
Is there
Like-
underscores in URLs?
I have one. No, it's the one that's in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
Hyphen.
Yeah.
So and that was KDP. B. Kevin D. Brown.
Yeah.
KDB.
And then if anyone, because you're probably gonna go to my website and get my phone number from the bottom anyway, it's 214-699-6384, and my name's Chris, and you can just call me or text me. If you text me, just kind of give me a reference of, where you met me, it'd be great.
And then, have an operations email, it's easier that way, so it's operations with an S at olive, like the food you eat, dash cove, like a water cove.com. So operations at olive-cove.com.
Awesome, and I'll send that out in the follow-up email, I'll send out the different links. So I apologize, I forgot to put those in the slide.
One piece of advice, I get a lot of people that wanna do business via text, and it's great to reach out and say, hey, I wanna talk to you. I don't agree to anything via text message. I ask everybody to send me an email. So it's fine to reach out to people via text, but I conduct business through email.
Totally agree.
Awesome, let's give a big round of applause for our panelists today. And thank you all for investing in your wealth building, in being able to add value to your clients. I encourage you to join us next, we're actually skipping next month. There will not be a meeting for May due to end of school and other conflicting trainings. But we will meet again in June, and the planned topic for that is passive investing in private entities. So that was another big, that was another big topic that people wanted to hear about. That was actually number 2 on the list. So join us in June for that one, and there is plenty of food in the back if you want to take some home, take a little goodie bag. And again, thank you so much to our panelists. This has been a great class.
Thank you all.
Thank you.